So I did a big look at the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, if you want to call it that. I know there's controversy about calling it that, because as I detailed in my video last week, it's a totally asymmetrical. It's an asymmetrical situation where the Israeli military, the Israelis have a military, and they have a navy, and they have an air force, and they have an army, and Gaza has none of those things. Gaza does the only militaristic, organization in Gaza, is part of Hamas, and they are launching rockets at the Israelis. But so much of the framing in mainstream media, by the White House, by Joe Biden, by his press secretary, is that Israel has a right to exist. Israel has a right to defend itself, but they're ignoring the escalation and the aggression from Israel towards Palestinians, and toward Arabs in Jerusalem, in Gaza, and the removal of people from their homes, the annexation of houses, and I went over this all. If you want to see a lot of me going into that, go look at last week's video. It's there for you. But what I think. Oh yes, and as John in the comments brings up, the Al Jazeera and AP officers were destroyed in Gaza. They bombed press offices. But that's the thing, is the Israeli government bombs a civilian population in one of the most densely populated areas on the planet. And it's an apartheid state. I mean, I don't mind being unequivocal about that as someone on the left, that Palestinian people have no recourse, legal or political. They are not given citizenship. They don't have freedom of movement. If people want to say, well, why don't they just, they don't want to be bombed in there. Why are they living there? They can't leave. They don't get to leave. They literally need passes to leave the area. Where's your pass? That's an apartheid state. That is terrible oppression. And so, I was accused of being biased, and if I have a bias, it's towards human rights and autonomy for people, for all people. And so, but now that this supposed ceasefire has been supposedly negotiated by the Biden administration, so they claim, I do want to focus on the situation from a American political perspective. And why? Because so much of what happens in Israel and what Israel gets away with, and the Israeli government, right, Netanyahu and his party and the military and the police forces there, is because of the United States and because of our massive amounts of monetary support, political support, rhetorical support, not just put in representative politics, but also in the media. Powerful people support Israel, and barely, I mean, just the name Palestine was barely being said, but things have kind of changed this time around. And Joe Biden is trying to take credit for the ceasefire that was recently supposedly negotiated, and that's really falling flat, because several days in a row, the United States, at Biden's behest, stood in the way of a UN resolution for a ceasefire. And so it seems very odd that Biden wants to take a victory lap, and the Biden administration wants to take credit for this ceasefire when they were literally standing on the toes of the UN for several days against a ceasefire. So it's a very odd. This is basically what is clearly illustrated by Joe Biden as being just the old conservative centrist Democrat, and very much a Reagan era Democrat. That Democrats who went totally conservative and neoliberal in the name of survival, frankly, of America's rightward turn at the time. And so that's just the political realities, but that reality is changing. But let's take a look at this. This is the Washington Post story, 11 days inside Biden's rapidly evolving approach to the Israel-Hamas conflict. So rapidly evolving because they're responding to the clear, the administration was responding to the rage and the clear difference in the political moment. Let's see. The statement blasted out last Saturday by Senator Robert Menendez, Democrat, New Jersey, chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, in response to the ongoing violence in Israel and the Gaza Strip was unusually harsh and immediately set off a, quote, commotion inside the White House, according to one person familiar with the reaction. Israel was out of line and needed to explain its actions, including the destruction of a Gaza high-rise containing international media offices, said Menendez, usually a staunch supporter of Israel and thus a bellwether voice of changing U.S. politics on the conflict between Israel and Hamas militants. Quote, this violence must end, Menendez concluded. Any death of civilians and innocent Jews and Arabs alike is a setback to stability and peace in the Middle East. Menendez did not coordinate his criticism of the U.S. ally with the administration, nor did he give the White House a heads up, prompting the scramble by President Biden's aides to understand the influential senator's shift in tone and what he meant about mainstream Democratic attitudes towards the conflict. Those shifting political stands were a key component in Biden's own evolving response to the Gaza conflict, which is the first major foreign policy crisis of his administration and which is viewed inside the administration as an unwelcome diversion from other priorities at home and abroad. The episode also marks a clear inflection point in U.S.-Israel relations, reflecting growing skepticism of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu among Democrats alarmed by the Israeli leader's recent actions. As well as solicitous relationship with former President Donald Trump. So it's very interesting. Here's a quick quote. It's a very, very different political environment that both the Biden administration and Israel are going to have to take into account, said Frank Lowenstein, who is a special envoy for the Obama administration's peace effort. The question is, who can exert political influence on the administration? And I think there's no question there were a lot of loud progressive voices that Biden was listening to this time around. That is true. We are going to get to that. But let's see. John in the comments adds, remember, Biden is falsely calling himself a progressive when he truly is not. And this is the thing. I think Biden thought, I remember Michael Brooks once said, during the primary, when he was arguing for Bernie versus Biden, because people were talking about age. That was a big issue with like how old Bernie is and how old Biden is. And he said, look, like you're going to have people, and this is just true, but especially when people get older, they're going to revert to type. That's what Michael Brooks said. They're going to revert to type. And Joe Biden is the type of guy who's an old neoliberal conservative, whereas Bernie is a rabble-rousing left-wing populist. And so we're seeing clearly that Biden thought he could revert to the old way of doing things with Israel and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and that he just kind of thought that would be fine. It wouldn't. That he could just rely on this kind of well-worn path of Israel needs to defend itself and ignore the Palestinians essentially completely. And that just doesn't work anymore. Part of it, I think, much like with Black Lives Matter, we're now seeing these things. We're seeing the inhumanity. We're seeing the death and destruction because of phones and, videos of bombings. And last week I played a video, of a family who recorded themselves inside their house as bombs are going off outside their window. We're not talking about missiles, right? Airstrikes outside their window, and they're screaming. Children are crying, babies are crying, and they're saying prayers, right? Because they fear for their lives. So people are seeing this, and really, they're expecting much more of what politicians are saying, specifically about, about Palestinians and their rights. You know, everybody talks about Israelis deserve to live in safety. Yeah, well, what about Palestinians? Do they deserve that too? To the point that even these beltway journalists are saying such things, which is not the norm anyway in this situation. So let me see here. Oh, here it is. So I do have this today. Jen Psaki, or Psaki, I guess is how it is, was giving a press conference, and she kind of got grilled on this, like how can Biden really say he was instrumental in this ceasefire when he was literally stopping the ceasefire, or a call for a ceasefire through the UN. So let's check this out really quick.
Is the president confident that this ceasefire will hold? And if so, can you explain a bit why? Did he receive any kinds of assurances from Prime Minister Netanyahu?
Well, we have strong assurances. Sorry, I don't know why that was a hard word. Let me try again. We have strong assurances from the relevant parties that they are committed to the ceasefire. And obviously this is something we will be watching extremely closely in the coming days. And I think what's important to note is in the final 24 hours leading up to the ceasefire, obviously the president was deeply engaged before that, but he was especially deeply engaged in that period of time, as were high-level senior officials here. And they were back and forth on the phone between many different parties, the Israelis, the Egyptians who were in touch with Hamas, and others, about the importance of not violating, even pre-violating the ceasefire in the hours leading up to it, as we see did not happen. So we will be in close touch with all parties. We clearly will be watching it, but we do have assurances from the relevant parties that they are committed.
And yesterday, before this was announced, you said you expected Israel to start winding down their operations because they had achieved significant military objectives. So how much of the timing of this do you think is because of the president's diplomatic approach? And how much of this is simply because the Israelis had exhausted much of their targets in Gaza?
Well, I think what's, again, important to remember is to point back to how these conflicts have worked in the past. And we have seen these conflicts last for weeks and weeks, many, many more lives lost. Now, we certainly know there were lives lost in this 11-day conflict. Everyone is a tragedy. But certainly, because of the president's deep engagement, his long relationships, the fact that he set a clear objective from the beginning that we were going to put out the noise and focus on our strategy of deep, intensive, quiet diplomacy, have conversations, not call out our partners and allies, and do our engagements through one-on-one conversations. We certainly think that had an impact. Now, of course, we also were watching closely and we're in touch with them closely about their military successes, and certainly that was a factor, but a part of the discussion as well.
And sort of a scheduling question here. There had been an expectation that there was going to be a conversation of some kind today between Republicans on the Hill.
Okay, so she also said many times during this press conference, when asked about the ceasefire, that the Biden administration was doing a quiet negotiation. When, I mean, literally hundreds of Palestinians are dead now, dozens and dozens of children, more than 60 children. They're still pulling bodies out of the rubble in Palestine. It's frankly ridiculous that they are trying to take credit for this and saying, oh, well, we were having a quiet negotiation. I'm sorry, but this is the United States of America. Like Joe Biden could have loudly declared this needs to stop. Like Netanyahu needs to stop. And when you look at the numbers, right? Yes, rockets are being fired by Hamas, but you literally have a dozen Israelis total killed over this time, and because we have this massively expensive Iron Dome system that we have funded in Israel, and hundreds of Palestinians are dead, civilians. They're bombing with airstrikes, not rockets, but precision-guided airstrikes into a civilian population, and you can hear pro-Israel people still think it's a viable excuse. Well, they warn the people, they call the owners of these buildings before they bomb them into the ground. What other they should be so lucky, what other country does that? I mean, that's some disgusting stuff. H Word has an interesting comment. Here's something that makes me feel terrible. All the headlines about the ceasefire, everyone I read I criticize for not adding "for now" to every one of them. Yeah, I see your point. That's an interesting take. Yeah, I think this is not too bad. This is why I definitely trust the Post more than the Times. The New York Times recently had a reporter, their Israel reporter, or their Israel Gaza whatever area reporter was like married to somebody who, can't remember if he lobbies for Israel or whatever it was, but he had financial ties to Israel. But this is a good headline. Fragile ceasefire finds parts of Gaza in shambles and renewed tensions in Jerusalem. Yeah, but I mean, the Israeli police went into the Al-Aqsa Mosque again today, the mosque grounds, not into the mosque, and were firing tear gas and rubber bullets at people during a ceasefire, right? So it's not like this stuff ever ends for the people of Gaza or East Jerusalem. J. World says, I hate press secretaries. It's a terrible job. It's like, it doesn't matter who does it. It's a bad, you're lying on behalf of the American government. Obviously, the last ones, I mean, the last press office was insane. I mean, they would literally go weeks, a couple months even without a briefing. I mean, these are supposed to be daily briefings, right? So this 11-day conflict has left hundreds dead Palestinians, including children. And, let's see. Office of Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas said, quote, the Israeli government, by continuing its policy of provocation, attacks, and incursions, is challenging international efforts that have been made to reach a calm and stop the violence and escalation in Jerusalem and occupied Palestinian territories, and to stop the aggression on Gaza. So, I mean, it couldn't be clearer than that. But even on top of this, the Biden administration is continuing with an arms deal with Israel that's $335 million worth of arms that we're going to sell to Israel. And what do we think is going to be done with all those weapons, right? I mean, I could tell you, it's kind of obvious. We all can see what's being done with the money. I mean, keep in mind, as a taxpayer, we're all, if you're an American, we are all we're helping subsidize the apartheid and the murder of innocent people. It's insane. Not everybody, the one big thing politically in America that's different today is we actually have progressive left politicians, representatives, couple senators who are actually willing to stand up about this. And he deserves tons of credit, and I'll get to it in a second, Bernie Sanders. But really, here's the headline. Senator Bernie Sanders to introduce resolution of disapproval on $335 million U.S. arms sale to Israel. But this was first proposed by members of the House, including AOC and I believe Rashida Tlaib. And let's look at this. But I just think everybody deserves credit for this, including AOC and Tlaib. But Bernie is, it's a big deal when something like this is also co-sponsored or co-introduced into the Senate. So the action comes as Biden calls for significant de-escalation of hostilities between Israel and Hamas. Senator Bernie Sanders introduced a resolution on Thursday disapproving of the U.S. sale of $335 million in precision-guided weapons to Israel, according to a draft obtained by the Washington Post. The resolution aims to halt the planned sale to Israel by the Biden administration of JDAMs, or Joint Direct Attack Munitions. Jesus, that's exactly what they're hitting Palestinians with. And small-diameter bombs, as the worst hostilities in years continue between Israel and Hamas. The resolution needs only a simple majority to pass the Senate, but if it were to be vetoed by President Biden, it would need a 2/3 majority in both chambers to take effect. So obviously this bill isn't getting anywhere, but at least we have somebody in the Senate fighting. And look at this, is making headlines all over. Bernie has been hitting the press hard with interviews about this. Let's see. Let me do my Bernie impression. At a moment when U.S.-made bombs are devastating Gaza and killing women and children, we cannot simply let another huge arms sale go through without even a congressional debate, Sanders said in a statement to the Post. Oh, it's a statement, so you can't even put the inflection. I believe that the United States must help lead the way to a peaceful and prosperous future for both Israelis and Palestinians. We need to take a hard look at whether the sale of those weapons is actually helping do that, or whether it's simply fueling conflict. Here's what I was talking about earlier. Representatives Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Mark Pocan, and Rashida Tlaib introduced a similar resolution on Wednesday opposing the sale of weapons to the Israeli government. House Foreign Affairs Committee Democrats are expected to summon a senior Biden administration official to a meeting as soon as Thursday to discuss the arms deal. For decades, the U.S. has sold billions of dollars in weaponry to Israel without ever requiring them to respect basic Palestinian rights, Ocasio-Cortez said in a statement. In doing so, we have directly contributed to the death, displacement, and disenfranchisement of millions. So that's absolutely the truth. And, that's the big change that we've seen. This is why I firmly stand in solidarity with our left progressive members of the House and the Senate, Bernie, the Squad, AOC and the rest. And I get that, we can criticize them, but I reserve my criticisms for good faith, and this is why I don't have patience for, frankly, the large group of, maybe they're just a very vocal minority of online so-called leftists who want to tear them down every step and not acknowledge that having leftists in Congress matters, because, clearly having people, we have not had people in the Senate or the House getting attention, saying these things about the Palestinians, saying things like Palestinian lives matter, as Bernie Sanders has. This is the Republicans attempt to pass a resolution through the House, and Bernie through the Senate as well. And Bernie called it out. So let's just hear really quick from Senator Bernard Sanders.
I happen to have read Senator Scott's resolution, and I was particularly struck by one sentence in it on page 2. And what it says, and I quote, "The Senate mourns the loss of innocent life caused by Hamas's rocket attacks," end of quote. That was on page 2. Now, I certainly agree with that. And I think every member of Congress agrees with that. The loss of 12 innocent Israeli lives is, in fact, a tragedy. But what about the loss of 227 Palestinian lives, including 64 children and 38 women? Does Senator Scott not believe that the loss of those Palestinian lives, 64 children and 38 women, among others, is not a tragedy? I believe that we should be mourning the loss of Israeli life, but we should also be mourning the loss of Palestinian lives.
Hell yeah, Bernie.
Or perhaps some people think that Palestinian lives don't matter. I would hope not. And let us be very clear that when we talk about the tragedy that is now taking place in Gaza, what we are talking about is not only the terrible loss of life. As I hope most people know, Gaza, before this war, was an extremely poor and desperate community, and the latest Israeli bombardment has only made a bad situation much, much worse.
So, making it very clear for everybody, and it should be mentioned that before this latest bombing of Gaza, the people in Palestinians don't have fresh water. They don't have reliable electricity. They don't have reliable sewage, right? Like all of these necessary things for just the survival of people, for to have a society. Now they're now being bombed. Trauma doctors were killed. The two top trauma doctors in Gaza were killed by Israeli airstrikes. The Israeli military was bombing the streets to their hospitals, to Palestinian hospitals. So people couldn't even access this besieged population. And it has to be made clear, and I'm glad it might be too much for Bernie or AOC and them yet, but it has to be made clear that what is going on in Israel is settler colonialism, plain and simple. We so many, I think a part of the right wing reaction to what are they obsessed with? Critical race theory, PC. They used to call it PC, political correctness. It's clearly, Trump's war against history. It's clearly because so many people don't have a living memory of colonialism and imperialism, and the decolonization that happened, in the wake of World War II. People don't understand that, and I think a lot of people, as the left has grown and the left has woken up, especially, Trump kind of shook the cobwebs off of a lot of people because he was so terrible. They are becoming aware of the history. They're becoming aware of the history of a lot of countries, of the world, and left-wing movements and what happened. I definitely have more about that in this stream. I'm going to do a review of a book I just finished a couple nights ago that's incredible about this. But that has to be made clear, because now we can actually see what colonialization looks like, what colonialism looks like. We're seeing it when when you watch the video of that man in the yard of this Arab family. He's taking their house, and he's saying, "Well, if I don't take it, someone else will. So what's the problem, right?" I mean, the kind of banality of that evil, right? Of stealing someone's home from them, and then turning them into calling them terrorists when anybody dares to resist that seizure. Like it's just it's nuts, and we're all seeing it, and we can now see it all through our phones. We're seeing people filming the colonization with their phones, and we're all watching it happen. So let's see. Andrew World: leftists who attack AOC in bad faith are like Green Day fans when they were signed to a major label and released Dookie. Effing sellouts. Fucking sellouts, you damn sellouts. Yeah, we all know John Ross, Dimmy Jor. Andrew World: Hamas warned Israel to stop the crap or will fire. Okay. That was from a bit ago, so you might have been referencing something specific, but yeah, this is it's just gnarly messed up. But as Michael Brooks reminded us, or as that video was being passed around, people remind us what Michael Brooks said. It's not complicated. It's actually very simple, this conflict. And it's just kind of a lie that this is just an intractable conflict, and it can't be resolved, or there's nothing can be done for it. So I don't believe that anymore. And so that's what's going on. Hopefully the ceasefire holds, but keep in mind, Palestinian people are right now, I mean, they're struggling for running water. They're struggling for electricity. They're struggling for medical care. They're digging people out of rubble. All of these massive parts of their society. The tallest apartment buildings, right? They're piles of rubble right now. So they're still dealing with massive amounts of pain. Evil Yoda saying, can you say late but gold? That's you, Evil Yoda. I got 9 folks watching on YouTube, 1 on Twitch, 1 on Facebook. Thank you all for being here. I appreciate you. If you haven't, please like the stream. Please share it if you're on somewhere you can do that. Please, click the bell or the thingamajigs, all the little buttons that will help, break through the algorithms and share honest, independent journalism. I'm not bankrolled by anybody except those who go to politicalpayne.com and donate. I am forever at your service if you do such a thing. Politicalpayne.com.